with the Florida Panthers having 3 days off once again and the games in hand not going their way throughout the weekend, we start now to get into the mindset of the Panthers being sellers at the deadline. On today's show, we are going to talk about when Bill Zito should rip the Band-Aid off and sell, and what would the expiring deals be worth on the Florida Panthers roster. We're going to discuss this next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast.
Your Locked On Panthers, your daily podcast on the Florida Panthers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
And welcome into the Sunday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. I'm Armando Velez, and you can follow me on Twitter at MondoMan12. Follow the show account on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel and send in your 5-star rating to whichever podcast app you listen to Locked On Panthers, and send it over to me on Twitter at LO_FLA Panthers, or email it to me at LockedOnFLAPanthers@gmail.com for your chance to win 2 free tickets to the Florida Panthers versus Chicago Blackhawks game. And I want to say thank you to everybody who is subscribed to the YouTube channel. We have just passed 200 subscribers on the YouTube channel. So thank you everybody for your support for this show, and thankful to be bringing you coverage of this team on the daily. But let's just jump right into it. We knew how detrimental this was to the Florida Panthers once they did lose to the Buffalo Sabres on Friday night. If you want to go check out my full recap of that game for the Cats and the Sabres, check it out. It was a Fairbanks Friday edition of the show, so you'll have a full description, painted a picture. But now the Florida Panthers didn't get much help with the games in hand over the weekend. The Penguins beat the Blues 3-2 in overtime. Tampa Bay beats Detroit. That's a little help, but Buffalo wins, New York wins, and I just turned off the game in the middle of Penguins Lightning after they scored 5 goals in the last 5 minutes of period 2. So not a lot of help for the Panthers on that front. So now we have to start getting into the mindset of what the Panthers are going to be doing at Friday's trade deadline. And it's also a Sunday edition of the show, which is another edition of Sunday with Slemp. Alex Slemp from Full Press Hockey is back here on the show for another edition of Locked On Panthers. And it's a little bit of a different episode for us today, as now we are starting to shift our focus to Friday's NHL trade deadline. Alex, welcome back to the show. And I want to give you the floor for maybe some opening thoughts on the Panthers game on Friday and what has developed over the weekend.
Yeah, well, hey, thanks for having me back. Good to be here again. I mean, not a lot going the Panthers' way. They're not getting help, that's for sure. It's been pretty tough scoreboard watching as a fan of the Panthers. Really nothing. I think 90% of these games have not gone their way. It's been tough. Buffalo game, obviously, a lot of people were calling that must win, and that didn't happen. But I mean, you go into that game without, your top 2 centers in Barkov and Bennett. I mean, what do you do? They're injured. It's the way it is. It's been a frustrating theme this season, and obviously that injury bug rearing its ugly head right for that game. Just brutal timing. What are you going to do? I thought the boys, fought as best they could, but without their leader, and obviously knowing how important that game was and being down the type of players they were down, that was demoralizing. You could see that a little bit too in the play, and just it's tough because I think that this team has battled really hard all year. These guys have really been playing their hearts out, and so I know that they want to be in a better place than they are right now at this part of the season, and for them to be on the outside looking in and the teams that they got to jump just on the heater they are. It's frustrating, I think, for the players, especially the fans, and it's tough. But hey, there's 20 games left. It's a quarter of a season in play. Who knows? You go on a heater, maybe something happens. So well, I guess we'll see. I still think this wild card race is going to be exciting regardless. I don't think Cats are thrown in the towel, but as you said, looking like could be sellers. Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and they were on a little on a run in January, and then of course the way it ended in before the All-Star break with Boston. But really, ever since that, ever since February 11th, they're 3-4-0 in their last 7 games, and of course, uh, two of those losses are. Excuse me, all 4 of those losses are 2 goals or more in those. If you want to count an empty net goal at the end in the Colorado game, then then it's only 3 of the 4 losses too. So it's just been about the Panthers not really even in their losses keeping them close. Of course, you come out firing against Tampa Bay in the first game back. Of course, the fact that the Panthers didn't really have to travel due to them hosting the All-Star game too for the guys who were there, and the great performance that Sergei Bobrovsky had against Minnesota. Of course, you had your must-win game against Washington, but then you have this must-win game against Buffalo. Everything it just becomes ugly from the start. Well, not from the start, but from the second period on, where you thought this game was right in hand, and
Yeah.
you put 50 shots on goal. I mean, you put 55 on Monday against Anaheim, and John Gibson stood on his head. He stood on his head again over the weekend against Carolina Hurricanes. He was the sole reason why they won. But just with the Panthers where they are, and you win that game against Buffalo, you're still behind in points percentage, even with that win, and you're at that point. You would be at that point where those teams wouldn't pass you yet, but you lose, and then those teams pass you. So it looks a little different. The mindset's a little different. The money puck odds, I believe last time I checked, were 39% after all those wins by the teams playing over the weekend. That's probably going to go down to probably low 30s now at this point for the team. And it's just when do the Panthers sell? And you spoke about 21 games left. If you want to get to 96, the maximum amount of points you can drop from now until April 14th, I think that's the last regular season game number 82, is 10 points. You could only lose 10 points from now until the last game of the season if you want to get it to that 96 point benchmark. And that's gonna be a tough task. That's 750 hockey for the Panthers, and they hadn't done that all season. So it's like, when do the Panthers rip the Band-Aid and sell, which is the title of this show? Do they do it right before the Tampa Bay game, or do they wait until the 11th hour of the trade deadline?
Right. I don't think it's a question of when they should sell. It's just how hard they should sell. That's kind of the way I've looked at, because to me, yep, there's 21 games. You're definitely not buying. Okay, you're not buying because, hey, let's say Panthers do play this 750 hockey, and they win the race in the wild card. Well, congrats. First prize is the Boston Bruins, right? I mean, and that team is stacked. They just did a trade to get Orlov and Hathaway over there. They are so deep. They're going to be a very, very difficult out. Then you also have the rest of the favorites in the East. So even if the Panthers were better positioned, I still don't think it was necessarily a buy year, just because of how good the East is. And we saw what happened last season. Zito went out and sold to try and get it, and it didn't work out. And now look, I mean, pipeline's dry. You don't have any first round picks. You got nothing to show for it, and that's tough. So you didn't want to do that again this year. So for me, it was always, I think, going to be a sell. I think if this team gets healthy, sure. I mean, anything can happen in hockey. Maybe they go on a run. But my thing is, how hard do they sell? I think with who they have available, I like to call it like a soft retool. sort of a deal.
Hmm.
So I don't think there's a whole lot of value in their expiring guys. I think their biggest trade chip, in my opinion, is Sam Reinhart. I think you'll probably have to retain on salary, but I think he's a guy that obviously plays good puck. He knows how to find the back of the net. But you look at how this team is built, the system that they go for, he doesn't really fit in it. Uh, I think his best year was last season when he was playing on a ridiculously stacked team. He was playing on the third line and got to face third pairing defensemen all the time, and he ate him up. But on this team, he can't be in that role. You can free up some cap space, and I do think his value warrants a first round pick in return. You probably have to retain for it. Zito needs to build up his pipeline. I think his goal this trade deadline is gain a first round pick for this year's draft. It's nice and deep. And I think that's just got to be his goal. However he goes about it, I think Reinhardt's probably that best piece to do it. And I think if he's off the team and you're still trying to like go for a run, I think the team still can. And I mean, obviously, Cup's probably not happening. So I think that's got to be the goal. Get that high draft pick and yeah, start building up the pipeline because you have some good contracts still going into next season that you can build off of and try and have a bit of a better year. So don't blow it up, don't sell away everything, but get stuff so you can start building up your prospect pool again because it is so lean right now.
And definitely depleted, of course, with last year's trade deadline, and of course with the streakiness that Sam Reinhart can be at times, and of course we do have some rumors about the other Sam as well, which we'll discuss in the next segment here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Athletic Greens, and I started using AG1 because sometimes I have a little bit too much coffee and I need a little bit of a break from the coffee. So I that's why I turned to Athletic Greens. So what is this stuff? With one delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food superfoods, probiotics, adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, nervous system, immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging. All the things. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition with just one scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Back on this Sunday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, and the NHL trade deadline is March 3rd. So join us live on the Locked On NHL YouTube channel from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, as the Locked On NHL hosts will be there to break down the biggest deals from across the league on the Locked On NHL Network, where it's your team every day. I still have yet to announce my plans for the trade deadline based on the fact that it is in the middle of the day. I do have a day job, but just going to try to work around certain things with the day job to try to bring all of you guys some right as the trade deadline passes to keep your content fresh on everything in relation to the Panthers based on the deadline. But but also, Alex, let's go. A few moves happened this week for the trade deadline. Of course, former Panther Evgeny Dadonov was traded from the Dallas Stars. From the Montreal Canadiens to the Dallas Stars. Who will be reunited with Pete DeBoer. Of course, in Dadonov's first stint with the Panthers, he was under Pete DeBoer. Jack Johnson, who was with the Colorado Avalanche last year, was with the Blackhawks, was traded back to Colorado. Timo Meier, the worst kept secret as far as the rumor mill, as far as the trade deadline.
Honestly,
traded to the New Jersey Devils, and will have his RFA rights too. Tanner Jeannot was scratched tonight for the Nashville Predators and could be on his way to Tampa. That nothing official on that. Patrick Kane to the New York Rangers could happen as soon as Wednesday, and the Rangers did keep 2 players from playing, even though they dressed based on paper transaction reasons. and Ivan Barbashev was traded to the Vegas Golden Knights. So the St. Louis Blues, we've talked about the Panthers retooling. The St. Louis Blues retooled big time in getting multiple first-round picks and getting Zach Dean, who was another first-round pick for Vegas. So if you're a first-round pick who gets drafted by Vegas, chances are you're never going to play for that organization.
Oh, wow.
So,
Honestly.
so with that, and the St. Louis Blues, with all that draft capital, we talked about a lot of people have talked about retooling for them. They could go use all that draft capital and go after Jacob Tricker and just be right back into the
Yeah.
to the race next year with
100%.
their core that they already have there. So with the Panthers, let's go back, let's circle this back around the Panthers and just see what they could do with like retooling. With you mentioned Sam Reinhart, biggest trade piece, which I agree with you. You could get a first. You gave a first for him and Devin Levi and for to the Buffalo Sabres. But of course, we spoke about streakiness for Sam Reinhart, and he'll have 1 year left after this year. Sam Bennett is another one, and his contract is very cap friendly, no pun intended, for the Panthers. He'll have 2 more years. But the question is, if you trade Sam Bennett, which Colorado has been kicking the tires reportedly on Sam Bennett,
Mhm.
how much faith do you have that Anton Lundell or Eetu Luostarinen will be ready to become the 2C either after March 3rd or starting next season for the Panthers? I would have more faith right now in Eetu Luostarinen taking those 2C minutes
Mhm.
as of right now, based on how he's developed. The development curve for Anton Lundell started on the defensive end, but even with going on Barkov's line, it's plateaued a little bit too.
Mhm.
So as of right now, I would trust more Eetu Luostarinen if they do decide to go that way versus Anton Lundell being the 2C.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. Um, and I think that the Panthers have to look at the Blues and be like, this is the template of how you do a soft rebuild and quickly turn it around. Uh, this is incredible what they're doing over in St. Louis. They've got a bunch of assets. They could very well be right back in it next season. So I think that's what the Panthers should try and look to do as well. Maybe they don't have quite the asset to maybe do it, but I do think that they should move on from Reinhardt. And as you said, Bennett has got a really cap friendly deal with term. He is a great addition onto any team. I would like for the Panthers to keep him for that reason, just because they're still kind of cap crunch. I think, like, where else are you going to find a guy who does what Bennett does at that money? I don't know. So I like it, but if the return is good, right, then I mean, you got to listen to everything. So if the Avs are kicking tires, I mean, maybe see what they're willing to throw around. At the beginning of the year, I thought Anton Lundell was going to be ready to take the leap. I really like the way that he had been developing, but as you said, he's kind of plateaued. He still has that defensive side to him, is very good, and I think he will be a phenomenal third line center and being able to play just kind of that two-way game there. But I think if you had to go with one of him or Luostarinen for those second line minutes, I'm with you on that. I think Lusto has really excelled this year. His development has just taken that whole other step. He's embraced a larger role, kind of ran with it, and he's showing he can sort of take on a 2C role with more minutes. So it isn't really who I'd want to go with next season. Just, you want to give him a little bit more time to develop, but especially just with how good the East is, like, I don't know if that you're going to have Barkov, Lusto, Lundell. I don't know if that's quite the deepest middle in the East. So I would like to find someone else.
Yeah, I'm totally with you there. And let's talk about what some of the expiring deals for the Panthers. And I looked up some of their trade history and what they were sold then. When Eric Stahl was with the Buffalo Sabres back in 2021, he was traded to the Montreal Canadiens for a 3 and a 5. You're not going to get that this time around. And even though Eric Stahl, he was a big part of that Stanley Cup run for the Habs, of course, mostly Carey Price there, carrying them to 5 games in 2021. But you're not going to get that value for Eric Stahl, like maybe a 6 or a 7 at this point in his career. Gudas, I've heard second, but I'm really not sure what I'm not sure a second round pick will be like, maybe a fourth for Gudis as well. If you're really if you're willing to part with that for a four, and if it sets up maybe another deal, um, you don't necessarily have to use that to draft somebody. It just depends what the Panthers want to do, because they've taken on reclamation projects too. Let's not forget that Gus Forsling claimed off waivers. Josh Mahura claimed off waivers as well. There's also there's also been rumors possibly about the Panthers being interested in Jesse Puljujarvi, who's high first round pick, who hasn't worked out in Edmonton even when he was paired with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, and he hasn't even gotten his scoring touch there. So
Mhm.
and the Panthers would have his RFA rights too if they trade for him. So if that is the Reinhardt, would a Reinhardt deal bring back Puljujarvi? But I don't know how much you're willing to risk on a reclamation project too,
Mhm.
for the Panthers. And then also, we talk about cap room as well when we talk about trading a Bennett or a Reinhardt. Could the Panthers be interested in an Eric Carlson too, where the Sharks would said they would want to retain only 18% of his salary, so that would bring his salary up to 9.4. I just calculated that right before recording. But how much of that Norris caliber production can you expect if you trade for an aging player, and using that as possible Ekblad insurance too, because he's regressed too.
Mhm.
And Ekblad's contract isn't bad, so that 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 tells me that they're going to keep him for a few more years still. So, but are they going to do that as like Ekblad insurance? But what if Carlson can't stay healthy neither too?
Mhm.
So that, and also I've heard interest in Torrey Krug, but his role has diminished as well, and he's not playing on the top line, on the top pair, and
Mhm.
he still has a whole bunch of term left. As far as Panthers going after Krug, if they do go after Krug, it won't be at the deadline. It will be in the off season.
Mhm.
But I wouldn't be a big fan of going after Torrey Krug for the Panthers.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think all those deals, that those are off-season deals. I mean, I think at the trade deadline, that's usually where an overpay is going to happen. And if, yeah, I just don't see something like that. Eric Carlson, I mean, he's an asset in what he brings to a team. He is a generational defenseman. He's having a great year on a not so great team. And obviously, you think like, okay, bringing him in, there's stuff that he can do. But obviously, money wise, I just don't see how they would want to go about doing. The Panthers would want to do that. Maybe if they didn't have 10 mil and a goalie, they would
Yeah.
take on a contract like that. But
Yes.
because they have that there. I just not really sure how you make those numbers quite work and still give yourself enough depth. Obviously, they've got some insane value off of Montour and Forsling with their cap
Mhm.
hits and how they're performing, but yeah, I think that one might be a little too big, at least for the deadline, but kind of fun to look at potentially uh, in the off season. So I think this deadline will give them a good idea of what sort of direction they want to go and how they want to approach offseason. There's a lot of good free agents that are going to be out there. So I think right now it's just, yeah, see if they can get as many first or seconds round picks as you can get. Like you said, you know, you can get rid of the stalls, but what are they really going to give you? You get a six? Like, how many 6 round picks ever play in the NHL? I just think it's kind of useless. Like, just let them play here.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I am. So,
Yeah. And the one time Mark Stahl was traded in 2020 from New York to Detroit, it was for future considerations. That's really what it was. So it wasn't much then neither. And
yeah.
Radko Gudas, both times that he was traded, is part of selling. So uh, it was one where Tampa Bay got Braden Coburn in that trade, and he was part of their
Right.
2020 run, and
Hmm.
then and then another one in 2019 as well. So he's been part of two cells in his career. So it's not something that Radko Gudas isn't used to neither. But of course, you can't bring this same exact core back. Of course, Mahura got extended as well. Let's not forget that. So 4 of your everyday players are under contract next season.
Hmm.
So what are they going to do about replacing a Gudis and a Stahl? Maybe one name out there is a South Florida native, Shane Gostisbehere as well. That's another name for the Panthers that they could possibly go for. Colin White is another expiring contract. Not a lot of value there. This was a reclamation project for the Panthers after being bought out by Ottawa, but but hasn't played much this season. So I think that they're gonna not give him an offer once he does become an RFA this summer. So likely the Panthers are gonna end up moving on from Colin White because I'm not sure what type of value he does in fact have. But we're gonna transition over to segment number 3, where we're gonna turn our attention from trade deadline to Tuesday versus the Tampa Bay Lightning, and see how the Panthers approach this game for them versus the Tampa Bay Lightning. We're going to discuss that next here on the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. But first, we're going to tell you all about Built Bar. And are you looking for a delicious treat but don't want all the fat and calories? Then you've got to try Built Bar. We just got through the holidays, and I know my goal is to eat a little healthier this year. What makes Built so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real chocolate. That's right, real chocolate. And they come in unbelievable flavors like churro, peanut butter brownie, and coconut almond. I'm not sure how Built does it, but he tastes like a candy bar while maintaining amazing macros. If you're close to Sam's Club, grab a 13-bar box with our hit flavors, brownie batter and churro. You can thank me later. Third and final segment here on this Sunday, February 26th edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. It's another edition of Sunday with Slemp, Alex Slemp from Full Press. Hockey is back here on the show. So at this point, Alex, we talked about the 10 points that the Florida Panthers, the maximum they can drop if they want to make it to that 96 benchmark. And of course, it'll require, of course, winning the swing games too. But just these two games, of course, on the road against Tampa Bay, which will be your only road game in this calendar month stretch, which brings great opportunity, but with so many games lost prior to it, you wonder if it's too little too late. But 2 points would be huge. The Tampa Bay Lightning just came off of shutting out Detroit. Vasilevsky was great. Of course, with back-to-backs, Brian Elliott gets the start. Erik Chernak just completed his suspension, got a 2-game suspension after a hit, elbowing. Did you see that hit? By the way, did you see that hit on Kyle Pozo that wasn't called against the Sabres? Erik Chernak?
No, I didn't.
It was in the neutral zone. It was in the neutral zone, and he came charging over to Kyle Pozo, elbowed. Chernak, repeat offender, got a 2-game suspension. I was thinking at first, okay, cool. The Florida Panthers are likely not going to face Erik Chernak right as that suspension was announced. But then the Tampa Bay Lightning had a back-to-back over the weekend. So the Panthers will be facing Erik Chernak on Tuesday. And the Tampa Bay Lightning, they're healthy too. Mm-hmm. No major injuries on their roster. The only LTIR space is still Brent Seabrook there, and no IR, no players on the IR. Vasilevsky is fresh off a shutout. They got embarrassed against the Pittsburgh Penguins, which I hadn't rechecked the final score, but last time I checked, it was 7-3 Pittsburgh. So final score ended up being the same exact score, 7-3.
7-3. Wow.
They're chasing Toronto.
Yep.
For that home ice advantage, even though it doesn't matter to Tampa Bay.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, it helps a little bit for Tampa Bay. And I believe Steven Stamkos on Sunday night just got his 700th point. He just got 500 goals a few weeks ago. And of course, when Tampa Bay and Pittsburgh meet, of course, 5 cups in like the last decade combined with those two. And they didn't help the Panthers. The Lightning didn't, but
they didn't want to do that.
They didn't want to do that. But now the Panthers go into Amalie Arena desperate
Hmm.
And I'm sure Tampa Bay, after getting embarrassed by Pittsburgh, it doesn't look good for the Panthers as they head into that matchup.
Hmm. Yeah, no, doesn't. But desperation, like you said, desperation hockey can bring out the best in a team. And if you had to say which team is playing for more, I would say Panthers probably have a little bit more to play for. If you think that the Lightning don't really care for, really locking up home ice, then yeah. But it's a division, or so it's a rivalry game, and I feel like it never really matters, where the teams are at. They always bring out such good hockey, and they're always competitive, close games. You can look at when the Toronto Maple Leafs playing the Montreal Canadiens this year, very opposite ends of the standings, and Montreal still take it to them because it's just those rivalry games. These two, there's bad blood there. I think that the Panthers have just as good a chance as any in this, even if things kind of lean towards the Lightning. So, regardless, it's going to be fun. It's going to be good. But the Panthers, their backs are against the wall. They have to go on a run. This is it. The players know it. It's not like, fans maybe have thrown in the towel and say this isn't the year. Players don't do that. They're so competitive. They are going to play. It doesn't matter what Zito does at the deadline. These guys are going to play their hearts out. They're going to give it their all. Everyone wants to make it. And hey, all you got to do is get in. Cinderella runs happen. So, yeah, maybe I'm a little bit more of a half glass full kind of guy. And I like to stay a little bit more optimistic. But I just know that these are competitive athletes who aren't going to throw it in, and they're going to bring their best, especially with their back against the wall. And I think this desperation mode is going to bring out a good fight in them, and I hope we see good results. Obviously, so much has to go their way in order for them to have a chance at the playoffs. But I mean, who's to say that they can't give us their best and they go on that run? So I'm excited for these last 20 and to see what happens here.
Yeah, and for let's go back. I want to go back to the 2021 season when the Panthers, when it comes to playing on the road in Amalie,
Mm.
they broke a long losing streak in the regular season at Amalie Arena. And if, of course, let's exclude the playoff series in 2021 and especially 2022 for just a moment. And what has happened ever since Bill Zito has come to the Florida Panthers? In the regular season, um uh, they split in 2021. Of course, that was the 56 game season of road games in Tampa Bay. They went 2-2 in 2021. Last year, they split the away games in Tampa. Florida won one in early October, and then they lost the second one, which I was there for the second one, where Braden Point scored an overtime winner. When doesn't Braden Point score an overtime winner against Florida? Happened even this year, but in FLA Live Arena, and they lost earlier back in November in a game that the Panthers were just flat out embarrassed. The only goal, if I recall, is Zach Dalpe, uh, the only one there, and that was and I remember the very next day after that, Paul Maurice calls a timeout in the middle of the second period against Seattle. So it was just an overall bad weekend for the Panthers there at the time in November, but even in the first 2.5 months too. But they've split for the most part, and a win would officially have that as a split for the last 3 seasons ever since Zito has come around. So there's something there as far as the Panthers. This core has learned to be more comfortable playing at Amalie Arena, even though prior to that it hasn't been an easy place to play.
Mhm. Yeah, no, I think that it's a good point. I mean, every game is different, but that's an interesting trend. I hadn't picked up on that. So I mean, that says something, and that
Mhm.
is good. Yeah, I think I like the way you word that. That they've the core has become more comfortable playing there and finding success there. I like that. So hey, that bodes well for tomorrow.
Yep.
Or
So
is that when they play? Is it tomorrow or
Tuesday.
Tuesday? Tuesday. My bad.
So
I'm all mixed up on my weekend here. Sorry.
yeah, it's definitely been that long weekend with the
Buddy.
loss and the games in hand not going the way that the Panthers want it. But on Tuesday's show, we will be bringing in hopefully the host of Locked On Lightning, Adam Danker, to the show to preview the matchup for the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning. We hadn't spoken since at least on an episode since the preseason. So we're gonna do that hopefully on Tuesday's edition. So make sure you are subscribed to the show so you get that episode. But Alex, I want to thank you so much for joining me on this edition of the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast. Once again, for another edition of Sunday with Slemp. Tell everybody where they can find you online.
Yeah, thanks again for having me, man. It's always a pleasure to be here. And if you're interested in more of my work, you can find that over at fullpresshockey.com. You can also check out my Twitter at Alex Slemp. I'm pretty active on there as well. So you can find articles, podcasts, everything I got on there. So if you like the cut of my jib, that's where you'll find it. So, but thanks again for having me here, Armando. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to coming back again.
Thank you, and yes, definitely follow Alex, and he's not afraid to tweet back at some criticisms on his takes on Paul Maurice. That's for sure. So make sure that
It gets
you
spicy.
follow him there. So Alex, thank you so much, and I'll see you soon.
Looking forward to it.
And if you like what you're hearing, please subscribe to the podcast to be notified every single time the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast jumps into your podcast feed. Don't forget to also subscribe to the other shows on the Locked On NHL Network, including Locked On NHL, Locked On Fantasy Hockey with Flip Livingstone and Steel Rodent, and Locked On NHL Prospects. Thank you for making the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast your first listen of the day. And for your second listen of the day, make sure you listen to today's episode of Locked On Sports Today. Peter Bukowski brings you a 30-minute or less podcast on the entirety of the sports scene with exclusive interviews and the take of the day. Follow Locked On Sports Today on the Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. So I'm Armando Velez with Alex Slemp, and you've been listening to the Locked On Florida Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day.